Hi, this is Kim, and this is video number 2 on the animals. We have covered several animal phyla so far, so let's review what we've covered. We've covered the phylum Porifera, which were the sponges, Cnidaria, which were the anemones, corals, jellies, Portuguese man of war, Hydra. We covered the flatworms, which were Platyhelminthes, and we covered the round worms, which were the nematodes, Nematoda. So again, for each of those phyla, you need to know the phylum name, who's included, any advancements in that group over the previous group, and examples of characteristics that all animals in that group share. So as we move on, the body cavity is going to become extremely important. And it is going to allow animals to get bigger and more complex. So let's talk about what we mean by a body cavity, also called a celome. So let's start by drawing the flatworms who don't have a body cavity. So they have 3 tissue layers, the endoderm, the ectoderm, and the mesoderm, but they don't have a space in which complex organs can be protected and develop. So looking at Platyhelminthes, they are what is called acelomate, meaning no celome, no body cavity. And let's look at how that presents itself. So right here in the middle of the animal is going to be the gut, made of endoderm. And then immediately surrounding that gut, with no space in between, is going to be the mesoderm. And this is going to be a cross section of the worm. Sorry, it should be symmetrical, but it's not. So no space. This is just going to be completely filled in with mesoderm. So the only space is the interior of the gut. Otherwise, the mesoderm completely surrounds the gut and goes all the way to the body wall, which is made of ectoderm. So we would have a layer of ectoderm on the outside. And these are the 3 colors that are typically used to represent these 3 different tissue layers. So yellow is usually endoderm, red is mesoderm, and blue is ectoderm. And you can see there's no space except for the interior of the gut. What this means is these animals cannot develop complex organs because when the muscles of the body wall contract, it's going to crush the organs. So they really can't get very big and they can't get very complex. I'm not going to take the time to completely fill this in, but you get the point. So this is the yellow is endoderm, and this is the inside of the gut. The red is mesoderm, and the blue is ectoderm. And the next group, Nematoda, they are what's called pseudocelomate. They have a pseudocelome. What that means is, once again, using the same colors, There is a gut lined by endoderm. And then there's a space called the pseudocelome. Outside of that space is a layer of mesoderm. And then outside the mesoderm is going to be a layer of ectoderm. So sorry, I'm not doing this perfectly, but I just want to paint a picture for you how this looks. Okay, outside of that, ectoderm. That space between the endoderm and the mesoderm can be filled with fluid to create a hydrostatic skeleton, and it can house some more complex organs than what we saw in the flatworms. So I'm not going to go through the trouble of drawing writing that, because you already know from the previous, but this space here, this space is the pseudocelome. And again, the worms can fill that with water, and they can have a little bit more complexity. A true celome is going to happen as we get to the next organisms. So the mollusks, so these are different phyla. So phylum Mollusca, phylum Annelida, and phylum Arthropoda all have a true celome. So they're what's called coelomate. And here's what that looks like. I'm going to switch back to thicker. Endoderm around the gut. Mesoderm this is where it gets a little trickier. More mesoderm. And then ectoderm. This space is the celome, the body cavity. A true celome is completely surrounded by mesoderm. Organs can attach and be anchored to that mesoderm layer. And now animals can get more complex. I'm going to make a whole list for you of the advantages to having this celome, to having this body cavity that's completely surrounded by mesoderm. So advantages to having a celome, a body cavity. Number one, body muscles can contract without crushing the organs. So when you move your body, you have, just think about your abdominal cavity and how it's surrounded by muscle, but then there's this fluid-filled space with your organs of your abdominal cavity anchored in place. You can do sit-ups, you can run, you can jump, you can stretch, and it's not crushing your liver or crushing your kidneys. That's because of your body cavity. It also means you have space to develop these complex organs. Sorry about that. And anchor them in a protective way so they're not just floating around in there. So now we start getting complex systems. We can develop a digestive system, more complex than previously. Excretory system to deal with waste. Circulatory system. Respiratory system. Reproductive system. All because of this body cavity, all because of this celome. With this space in these more complex organ systems, we're going to have better transportation of nutrients, gases, hormones, waste products, and now, because of all this, animals can get larger. If you can more efficiently get nutrients to your tissues, gases to your tissues, you can have complex muscles that can contract without crushing your organs, you can now get bigger. So the first time we're going to be seeing some bigger organisms is mostly with the mollusks. Mollusks have a body cavity, and if you've seen giant squid before, you know that mollusks can get pretty big. So let's just look at these pictures one more time. I really wish that on this one I had used the fat marker to start with, but no space at all in here. This is an acelomate organism, the flatworms, no body cavity. The next is the pseudocelome. There's a space there, but it's not lined with mesoderm on both sides. And then this is a true body cavity completely lined with mesoderm, and the advantages to having a body cavity. I also want to just quickly review the 3 embryonic tissue layers and what those can develop into. And I'm just going to give you a short list of those. So I'm going to start with the ectoderm. Sorry, I saw the fat pen. The ectoderm, which is shown in blue, typically, that outer layer, that develops into the epidermis of the skin. It develops into the lining of the mouth and anus. So not the entire digestive tract, that's going to be endoderm. The cornea of your eye, your nervous system, and your teeth. So obviously animals who don't have some of these structures doesn't develop into that. Okay, mesoderm, which is always represented in red. I should have written ectoderm in blue. Mesoderm, it can develop into elements of the skeletal system. Muscles, the excretory system, circulatory and lymphatic systems. Lymphatic system is an important part of your immune system. Your reproductive system comes from mesoderm, and the reproductive system of all animals comes from mesoderm. The dermis of your skin and lining of the body cavity, which is very important. Okay, and then finally, endoderm, always shown in yellow. That is, I'm going to write it in black now, lining of the digestive tract, except for the mouth and anus. But your entire intestines, stomach, all of that is lined with endoderm. So lining of the gut. Lining of the respiratory system. Lining of the excretory system. So lining of your bladder, your ureters. Lining of the reproductive tract. Your liver, your pancreas, and your thyroid. So that's not a complete list, but it just kind of gives you an idea of once you have 3 tissue layers and you have a body cavity, animals can get a lot more complex. Okay, so now let's move to our next phylum. So again, going back, we've had Porifera, Cnidaria, Platyhelminthes, and Nematoda. So this is going to be our 5th animal phylum, and it's going to be phylum Mollusca. The mollusks. This is an extremely large, diverse group of animals. In fact, it's the second largest group of animals on Earth, meaning second largest group in terms of number of species. And it's incredibly diverse. It includes, I'm going to show you pictures of these, that it includes chitons. It includes all the bivalves, such as oysters, clams, scallops, mussels. It includes what are called the cephalopods, which are the squid, octopus, cuttlefish. That's a U. Sorry about that. That's CU. It includes the nautilus. And then some other groups. It includes the gastropods, which are snails and slugs. And as you know, these can be terrestrial, meaning they live on land, or they can be aquatic, freshwater and saltwater, which is pretty crazy. Includes barnacles, limpets. So a very diverse group of organisms. They can get very large. They have very complex nervous systems in some. As you probably know, the octopus in particular are very intelligent. They can solve problems, work puzzles, learn. So huge diversity in the mollusks. What do they all have in common? Well, they share a basic body plan. And that basic body plan includes a shell, So all mollusks have a shell, even if it's been greatly reduced. If you've ever made calamari or dissected a squid in biology class, you know, there's this little clear piece you pull out called the pen, and that actually is the remnant of the shell. They all have a structure called a foot, and that foot is used for a variety of things. It can be used for attachment to rocks or other surfaces. It can be used for capturing prey, defense, obviously locomotion, for mating, for holding eggs, lots of different functions of the foot. Then they all have what's called a mantle and a mantle cavity. I'm not really going to take the time to go in a lot of detail about the mantle and the mantle cavity, but if you do take an organismal biology course at some point, you will learn a lot about the mantle and the mantle cavity in the mollusks. I just want to show you some pictures of mollusks, but I want to really emphasize again, they are coelomate. So they have a true coelom, a true body cavity. And that's how they're able to develop this complexity. And they can get very large octopus, very large squid in particular. So let's look at some examples of those. Here's a scallop. These guys are filter feeders. A lot of mollusks are filter feeders. Snail on land, and then a sea snail. This is a nautilus. Nautilus are very amazing. They have this really cool chambered shell, kind of like a mini squid with a really cool shell. This is actually a cuttlefish. Looks a lot like a squid. An octopus, you can see in the octopus, the foot has really been reduced to just the suckers on his legs. And then if you look at something like a chitin, if you've ever seen these in the tidal zone in San Diego or any kind of tide pools, they really are subject to wave action, water moving in and out. They need to adhere to the rocks so they don't just get swept away. And also at low tide, being able to attach with that foot is going to keep them from drying out. This guy's really camouflaged. This is one of my favorite class names in the mollusks, Polyplacophora. It means many plates. And you can see that this animal has a lot of plates on its back. I love this. Look at this giant snail. Is that crazy? People keep these as pets. Really beautiful mollusk. Really beautiful giant clam. These, of course, are a really important source of food, not just for animals in the ocean, but we eat them. They're a big source of food for us. You can see some of the complexity here in this bivalve. A heart, a kidney, muscles, intestine, mouth. You can see where they show the foot and the mantle. Has gills for respiration. Lots of complexity there. And then, of course, the cephalopods, very complex. In fact, the most intelligent invertebrates. Here's an octopus trying to open a bottle because there's a treat in there, and they can learn how to do that. Okay, phylum Mollusca. The next phylum we're going to look at are the segmented worms. And they also have a true body cavity. And they are in phylum Annelida. The segmented worms. So we've had the flatworms, the roundworms, and now we have the segmented worms. So they have a true coelom, so they are called coelomate. Two big advancements in the segmented worms. One is segmentation. Segmentation is a big deal in animals because this is going to lead to specialization of body segments. And the arthropods are really going to go wild with that. They're also the first with what's called a closed circulatory system, meaning it's not just fluid sloshing around, it's actually contained in blood vessels. They have blood vessels and they have a heart. Who does this include? It includes the earthworms, several different types of segmented marine worms, and it includes leeches, which are parasitic. In fact, what's interesting about leeches is they're what's called ectoparasites. They live outside the host. Fleas and ticks are also ectoparasites. The worms we looked at before were called endoparasites. Okay, they live inside the host. Leeches are interesting because they are actually medicinal and they are still used today in medicine. You know, they used to, a long time ago, if you had cold or flu, they would put leeches on you to suck out the toxin. They felt like you could suck out the bad blood and you would get better. They're used today in microsurgery. They can put leeches on, you know, if they're doing a surgery on your fingers or toes, they can put leeches in there because leeches produce what's called pyridine, which is an anticoagulant. Okay, so let's think about it. You're an ectoparasite and you're sucking blood from your host. You don't want the blood clotting as it's coming into your mouth parts. So they produce this anticoagulant. So basically the mouth parts are getting blood that's not clotting. No, the clotting factor is not working. So they actually harvest this and make an anticoagulant that can, it's an actual drug that is given to patients sometimes after surgery, but they're actually used in microsurgery for this reason too. If they need to keep those tiny little capillaries open, they'll let the leeches put that anticoagulant into that area while they're working on it. I'll just show you some quick pictures of annelids. Really, segmentation is the big deal, and it's the next group that are going to go wild with the segmentation. So I'll show you those. So here are the leeches. Here's some marine worms at the top, and of course the earthworm. Just want to show you some of the things in an earthworm that you probably didn't know about unless you did an earthworm dissection in high school biology. But there's a centralized nervous control center called the brain. There are complex blood vessels, mouth, pharynx, esophagus, multiple hearts, male and female reproductive parts, a nerve cord. Very complex. This nephridium is involved in part of the excretory system. So segmentation is going to allow these animals to develop even more complexity on top of the complexity they're getting because they have a true body cavity. Okay, the next group of animals are the arthropods, phylum Arthropoda. So let's go back to the notes. I'm going to change color. Phylum Arthropoda. These are the most numerous animals on Earth. They live in virtually every ecosystem. Over 1 million known species. the most numerous of which are the insects. But let's talk about who this includes. So it includes spiders, ticks, and mites, which are all grouped together. It includes the insects, millipedes, and centipedes. It includes all the crustaceans. So lobsters, crabs, shrimp, crayfish, and then it includes the horseshoe crabs, which are different than normal crabs. So huge diversity in the arthropods. Arthropoda, this means joint. Arthro means joint, and poda means feet. Jointed feet. Arthropods all have jointed appendages, and really appendages are the big deal in the arthropods. They have gone crazy with their appendages, a huge diversity of form and function. Let's talk about some of the functions of appendages in the arthropods. Obviously, locomotion, and that locomotion can take on so many different forms. They can fly, they can swim, they can walk. Sensory, especially the antennae. And some groups of arthropods have multiple antennae. Defense. If you have ever tried to pick up a lobster, you know about the defensive structures that are appendages. Feeding. Capturing prey. Let me go back to feeding for a second. The mouth parts are actually considered appendages, and they are so complex. Just looking at insect mouth parts alone, there's so much complexity there. I love insect mouth parts. They're so interesting. Reproduction, the actual mating, holding eggs. So lots of different functions of those appendages, and really arthropods have just gone wild with that. Arthropods have an exoskeleton, meaning the skeleton is on the outside and it's made partially of chitin. Remember, chitin is also found in the cell walls of fungi. So it's pretty interesting that arthropods, which are animals, have chitin that makes a part of their exoskeleton. Segmentation is a big deal, and really they have specialized body segments, and I'm going to show you an example of that when I show you the slides in a minute. I'm going to give you a cool example of that. And really complex mouth parts, like I had mentioned up above, really different feeding strategies, especially in the insects. So let's just quickly look at some examples of arthropods. First, I'm going to show you that just within the insects, they are the most numerous. About 80% of our arthropods are insects, and you can see most of those are beetles. And then you can see, flies, butterflies, moths, bees, wasps, ants. This is a bee, obviously, which is an insect. And if you look at how these body segments are specialized, head, thorax, and abdomen. The thorax is packed full of muscles, and that's where the wings and the legs are. So that thorax is going to be used for locomotion. whereas the head is where all the sensory functions are going to be located. So looking at the head, really everything, the brain, the eyes, the mouth parts, everything sensory, the antennae are all going to be in the head region. Then the thorax is for locomotion. So now that means if you can pack the thorax full of muscles, all of the real organs can be in the abdomen, which is everything from the thorax back. So this would be the abdomen. And that's where the organs are. So when this insect is flying or walking, it's not contracting muscles that are going to crush its organs. It does have a body cavity, so that's not a huge concern. But also it's pretty cool that they can just pack this thorax full of muscles, and that's really concentrated for locomotion. And then the head, again, everything sensory and nervous system. So specialized body segments, that's a big advancement in animals. You can see here in the crustaceans, the head and the thorax are combined into what's called the cephalothorax. Cephalo means head. So this is head and thorax together. And then again, the abdomen. So the abdomen is going to be where the organs are. And then sensory and locomotion are going to be in this cephalothorax. You can see they have antennae, eyes. You can see the gills. And jointed feet, arthropoda, exoskeleton, all those different traits of arthropods. So in the next video, we're going to talk about chordates, which includes the vertebrates, but we do have one more invertebrate group left that are actually more closely related to us than all the other invertebrates, and those are the echinoderms. So we have one more phylum left in the invertebrates, and that's phylum Echinodermata. It means spiny skin. So echino means spiny, and derma is skin. These are the spiny skinned animals. This includes sand dollars, sea urchins, sea stars, and brittle stars. What do they all have in common? Well, they have this 5 body part plan that they all share, and I'll show you a picture of that. They actually have gone back to having radial symmetry. So all of the organisms we've talked about, starting with Platyhelminthes leading up to this, all have bilateral symmetry. Now we're going back to organisms that have radial symmetry, which again means they're round in some way, and you can have 2 halves that are mirror images by cutting this a number of different ways. They have what's called a water vascular system, where it's a system of tubes that fill with water to help them move. And if you've ever seen a sea star moving very slowly in a tide pool, you've seen that water vascular system at work. And it's combined with what are called tube feet. And those little tube feet are filled with water also. So let's look at the echinoderms. And then I'm going to tell you one more thing about them. Oh, I left off the sea cucumbers in my list too. So sea urchins, sand dollars, brittle stars, sea stars, and sea cucumbers also. So add that to your list. Sea cucumbers are so cool. I love sea cucumbers. So you can see the 5-part plan on the sea star. He not only has 5 legs, but he has 5 parts in the middle here. A brittle star, which is in a different class than the regular sea stars. Sea urchin, which if you turn it over, you can see the 5 parts there. Sand dollar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here's a picture of the water vascular system and the tube feet that fill with water for locomotion. I just want to tell you something else about the echinoderms though. Let's go back to this chart. If you look at everyone we've looked at so far, okay, so starting with the sponges, this is hard to read because it's pretty small. So here are the sponges, phylum Porifera, no true tissues, no germ layers, meaning no endoderm, ectoderm, or mesoderm. And then we start getting true tissue layers, and that branches into those with just 2, okay, versus those with 3. And the only group that we are studying in this class that has just 2 are the cnidarians. And remember, they also had radial symmetry. Okay, then we get into those with 3 tissue layers. So this is where that starts, 3 tissue layers versus just 2. And then we branch off into those that have a body cavity and those who don't. So the only acelomate organism that we looked at with 3 tissue layers are the Platyhelminthes. Then we get the pseudocelome, and the other one we looked at were the nematodes. And then finally a true celome, and you can see it includes the mollusks, the annelids, and the arthropods. It also includes the echinoderms and the chordates, but you can see that there's one more branch here, a group called the protostomes and a group called the deuterostomes. The protostomes include the mollusks, annelids, and the arthropods, whereas the deuterostomes include the echinoderms and the chordates. I'm going to write that on paper for you. They all have segmentation except for the mollusks. So segmentation have in the annelids, the arthropods, the echinoderms, and the chordates. But what's significant about the protostomes versus the deuterostomes is how they develop embryologically. And that's what makes us more closely related to the echinoderms than the other invertebrates. Chordates are more closely related to the echinoderms because they are all deuterostomes. What does that mean? So let's just quickly look at protostomes versus deuterostomes. Again, the protostomes, this includes mollusks, so mollusca, annelida, and arthropoda. And I really should have capitalized the first letter there, but I didn't. Deuterostomes, this includes echinodermata and chordata. The chordates are going to be covered in a different video. That's going to be video number 3. What's different is first, the pattern in which the cells start dividing and whether or not those cells have a fate for what type of cell they're going to become at the 8 cell stage or not. Okay, so in the protostomes, it's called spiral cleavage because they're dividing in this spiral pattern, okay, versus radial cleavage. Also, at the 8 cell stage, protostomes, it's already been determined what type of cell those are going to become. But in deuterostomes, it has not yet been determined. The other thing that happens is as these cells start dividing, they form a ball called the blastula. The blastula is basically a ball of dividing cells. And eventually an opening develops in that blastula. Whether that first opening becomes the mouth or the anus is the other difference between the protostome development pattern and the deuterostome development pattern. Okay, that first opening is called the blastopore. And In the protostomes, the blastopore becomes the mouth, and in the deuterostomes, the blastopore becomes the anus. So blastopore is that first opening, and oops, sorry, I just did it the opposite way. The blastopore becomes the mouth in the protostomes, and in the deuterostomes, it becomes the anus. Okay, I'm going to go back to the notes, and I'm going to write this down so you know exactly what you need to know. Okay, let's go back to the notes. Protostomes versus deuterostomes. The big difference is in how they develop embryologically. So starting from that first cell, the zygote, how that zygote starts developing, it divides, divides, divides. It eventually forms a ball of cells called the blastula. And the first opening is the blastopore. Pattern of cell division differs. When determinate cell fate happens differs. And you don't need to memorize which one is which, but I do want you to know this. What the blastopore becomes differs. And in the protostomes, blastopore becomes the mouth. And in deuterostomes, the blastopore becomes the anus. And that is us. So the first opening in that blastula is the blastopore. Who are the protostomes? It's phyla Mollusca, Annelida, and Arthropoda. Who are the deuterostomes? Two phyla, Echinodermata and Chordata, which is going to include us. So that's all for video number 2. The next video number 3 is going to cover the chordates, including the vertebrates, which includes us.